All right, welcome to the screencast where we're going to talk about photosynthesis and cell respiration, how they're similar and how they're dependent on one another. Okay, earlier in the unit, we learned about an organelle called the mitochondria. We described the mitochondria as the powerhouse of the cell, and we said specifically it's making a form of energy called ATP. ATP is the energy that your body uses, and it's making that energy from the sugar glucose. The sugar glucose is made during photosynthesis. The process of making that energy, the ATP from glucose, is called cell respiration, and it's made inside the mitochondria. Okay, so what exactly is cell respiration? What's happening during cell respiration? When we breathe, we take in oxygen. Breathing is called just plain old respiration. But when we're talking about the formation of ATP from oxygen and glucose, we call that cell respiration. So again, when we breathe, we take in oxygen. The red blood cells in our lungs carry the oxygen to all the other cells of the body, and then the oxygen is transported across the cell membrane to the mitochondria. A similar event occurs when we eat. When we eat, our food is converted to glucose. Again, the blood carries the glucose to all the cells of the body. And again, the glucose is transported across the cell membrane to the mitochondria. So the mitochondria are receiving oxygen from the lungs and glucose from the stomach. All right, within the mitochondria, the energy stored in glucose, which we're going to learn about later, is converted to a different form of energy called ATP. ATP is just like the Energizer Bunny's battery. It keeps us going and going and going. But the part that's really kind of cool is that oxygen has to be present for ATP to be made. If we're not breathing properly, and maybe you've heard this in gym class where they tell you to breathe well while you're exercising, or maybe coaches have told you this, if we're not breathing properly, ATP cannot be made, and instead something called lactic acid begins to form in our muscles, and that causes our muscles pain, our muscles start to ache. Then we stop exercising and we start breathing because we're in pain, and then all of a sudden we're able to make ATP again. Brilliant. Okay, now scientists can show what's happening inside the mitochondria, this process called cell respiration, using an equation. If you look down below, it says oxygen plus glucose, so those are the two things that are brought into the mitochondria, make, well, a little side product, carbon dioxide. We talked about this earlier. Carbon dioxide is a waste product. When carbon dioxide mixes with water, it forms carbonic acid, and so we have to exhale it. We have to get rid of that carbon dioxide so that we don't develop a sort of acidic pH in our blood. And then the part that's good about cell respiration is that it produces ATP. So one more time, oxygen and glucose are combined in the mitochondria. You get a side product that's unhealthy for us called carbon dioxide that we get rid of. We also get a little bit of water, and more importantly, we get our energy called ATP. Now, many of you may have heard that cell respiration and photosynthesis are related, and in fact, they are opposite processes. If we look again at the equation for cell respiration, oxygen and glucose are entering the mitochondria, carbon dioxide, water, and ATP are being produced. So oxygen and glucose are the reactants, carbon dioxide, water, and ATP are the products. If you look at the equation for photosynthesis, you can see that the process is exactly reversed. The only difference is that instead of having ATP as the energy form, we have light, sunlight specifically, as the form of energy. So the reactants for photosynthesis, light is captured, carbon dioxide is drawn in from the atmosphere, and water is pulled up usually from the roots of plants. They combine in a chloroplast to make oxygen and glucose. And then anybody who has a mitochondria, which is basically all eukaryotic cells, they take that oxygen and glucose and make their ATP. So basically, they're the opposite processes. So how exactly does photosynthesis occur? Well, first of all, the sun releases energy in the form of light. You and I cannot capture that energy and do anything with that energy. However, plants have small organelles called chloroplasts. It's what makes plant cells green. And the chloroplasts are able to absorb that light energy. The plants can also take in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and that becomes important. The chloroplasts then use the sun's light energy to attach the carbon dioxide atoms in a new form, carbon atoms in a new form from the carbon dioxide. This produces a molecule called glucose. So look carefully at the diagram on the left. The red molecules are the oxygens and the black molecules are the carbons. The black atoms, I'm sorry, I didn't say that right. The red atoms are oxygens and the black atoms are carbons. If you look at the diagram on the right, you see those black carbons from carbon dioxide and the red oxygens. And then there's also some hydrogens in there. Of course, the hydrogens are coming from a couple of sources, but water is a good source. So it says down below, think about it. If the carbons and oxygens in a glucose molecule come from CO2, where do the hydrogens come from? Hint, what do all plants need? Water, of course. Glucose is a stored form of energy. The sunlight escapes us. It enters the atmosphere and then it's gone and we lose that energy. So what chloroplasts are doing is capturing that sunlight and storing it in this high energy molecule called glucose, which is much like the energy stored in a battery. And like glucose and batteries, ATP is also a form of stored energy. So when a plant collects the sunlight, it turns that sunlight and carbon dioxide into a form of energy called glucose. Then it takes the glucose and transports it to its own mitochondria. Plants are not making oxygen and glucose for us. They're making oxygen and glucose for their own mitochondria, which then convert that glucose into ATP, and then plants can do their work. We don't think of plants as needing to do much work, but plants need to grow and produce flowers, etc. And that's how they do it, is through the production of ATP and the use of ATP. And that's it.